The baby's cry was the only sound as the door slammed shut, rattling the loose boards of the porch and sending a cloud of dust swirling around Martha's bare feet. It was the kind of slam that didn't just close a door, it cut ties, ended bonds, and sealed a fate. The lamp within the house flickered for a moment through the cracks and then went dark. Just like that, the last trace of warmth, the last shred of belonging she had in that house, was gone. Martha stood frozen on the porch, clutching her newborn daughter tight to her chest as if the tiny body was the only anchor she had left in. A world determined to cast her adrift. Her husband's words still rang in her ears, sharp and final, words that no wife or mother should ever hear. I wanted a son, not a burden. He had spat the sentence with such disgust that she could still feel the sting of it, more cutting than the winter wind that howled across the plains. He didn't look at the baby once. Not once. His face, twisted with disappointment and something uglier, was the last thing she saw before he shoved her outside like a criminal being driven to exile. The shawl around her shoulders was thin, hardly enough against the biting night air. The newborn whimpered, wriggling beneath the rough blanket Martha had managed to snatch in her desperate hurry. She pulled it tighter, whispering a lullaby through choked sobs, desperate to soothe her baby. While her own heart was breaking, beyond the porch stretched the lonely town of Dry Creek, silent beneath a cold half-moon. Shadows stretched long across the dirt street where shuttered windows and locked doors lined either side. Not a soul stirred. And yet Martha knew with the certainty of the condemned that behind those doors and windows whispers were already spreading like wildfire. The story would be told by morning. That Samuel Harker had cast his wife out for bearing him not the strong son he'd wanted, but a daughter. A girl. A disappointment. Shame burned hotter than the wind's bite. Crawling up Martha's neck as she imagined the looks, the muttered judgments. She could already hear the voices. She failed him. She couldn't give him what he wanted. A weak woman, cursed with a girl. Tears blurred her vision, but she bit them back. She couldn't afford to collapse, not here, not now. She wasn't just Martha Harker anymore, she was someone's mother. And that tiny someone, squirming in her arms, needed her to be stronger than she felt. The baby's soft wails pierced the silence, a reminder that life demanded attention even when the world was cruel. Martha rocked her gently, humming again. Though her lips trembled, she thought of the cradle Samuel had built months ago, sanded smooth from oak, with a horse carved at its head because he had believed, with all his pride, that it would hold a son. That cradle would never rock his daughter now. The ache in her chest grew unbearable. She had no family nearby. Her parents were gone, the small farm she'd grown up on lost to debts and drought. Samuel's home had been her only shelter, his name her only shield. And now both had been ripped away with one slammed door. The dirt road stretched before her, endless and uncertain. The church bell tower loomed at the far end of town, its dark silhouette stabbing the sky. Martha considered walking there, begging the pastor's wife for a place to stay, but shame stopped her feet. The church folk had been the first to nod approvingly when Samuel boasted of wanting a son. To arrive with a daughter in her arms would only confirm their scorn. The cold crept deeper, numbing her fingers even as she held her child close. She whispered to the baby, voice breaking, "You're not a burden. You're mine, and I won't let you go." And yet, as the silence thickened, despair pressed heavier on her shoulders. How long could she walk the dirt roads alone? How long before her baby's cries drew wolves or worse, men who saw opportunity in a woman with no one to defend her? Her knees buckled, and she sank slowly onto the steps of the porch, clutching the child, tears dropping into the dust at her feet. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, lonely and haunting, and the sound seemed to mock her. Then she heard it, a sound that did not belong to the night's natural chorus. Hoofbeats. distant at first, like a low drumbeat rolling out from the horizon, then growing louder, heavier, like thunder on dry ground. Martha stiffened, heart leaping with a mix of fear and desperate hope. She rose, clutching the child tighter, eyes straining into the darkness beyond the town's edge. Hoofbeats came closer. The ground seemed to tremble beneath them. Whoever rode in the night was no ordinary traveler, and in that moment, shivering in the dust with her daughter in her arms, Martha felt the shift of fate. Someone was coming, someone or something that would change everything. The hoofbeats grew louder, pounding the earth like a war drum. Martha stood frozen in the dust, her arms tightening around her child as though sheer will could shield the infant from whatever came charging out of the darkness, fear tangled with. Something else hope she didn't dare name. Whoever this rider was, he wasn't moving slow. He came with the speed of a storm breaking across the plains at last from beyond the low ridge outside town. The figure appeared, a horse black as midnight, its mane tossing like shadowed flame, and upon it, a rider who seemed carved from legend. The moonlight caught him, revealing a body built like a fortress bare chest sculpted with muscle, bronze skin etched with scars both fresh and old. His long black hair flowed wild in the wind, braids laced with eagle feathers, beads, and bone. Charms that rattled softly like whispers from another world. Martha's breath hitched. She had heard of him before. Everyone in Dry Creek had. The settlers called him the Giant of the Plains. Some spat his name like a curse, others whispered it with awe and fear. No one knew where he had come from or why he wandered so close to the town's borders. The only certainty was that he was dangerous, a man of war, a ghost from battles past, a reminder of the land's first people who refused to be erased. As the rider slowed, dust swirling around the horse's hooves, Martha felt the full weight of his presence. He dismounted in a single fluid motion, boots hitting the ground with the heaviness of thunder. For a moment, he didn't speak. He simply stood there, towering, eyes glinting like embers beneath the moon. He was close enough now that she could see the turquoise beads strung across his chest, the copper armband that caught the faint light, the bone pendant that rested against his sternum like a sacred oath. Her knees weakened, trembling so badly. She thought they might give out. Still, she clutched her daughter closer, lifting her chin with a defiance born not of strength, but of desperation. If this warrior meant her harm, she would stand as tall as her shaking body would allow. The silence stretched. The only sound was the restless snort of his horse and the quiet, hiccuping cries of the baby. The man's gaze moved from Martha's tear-streaked face to the tiny bundle in her arms. His expression shifted just barely. The hardness of his jaw remained, but something flickered in his dark eyes, something unreadable yet piercing. When he finally spoke, his voice was deep, steady, carrying the weight of rivers and storms. "You walk alone with a child in the night." "Why?" Martha swallowed hard. Her lips were dry, her throat raw from weeping, but she forced the words out. They cast me out, my husband, my home." She couldn't bring herself to say. More not the whole ugly truth of why. Not yet. The warrior tilted his head slightly, as if weighing her words against the unspoken story written in her face. His silence was almost more unnerving than anger would have been. "You have no fire," he said finally, a strange note in his tone, as though he wasn't speaking of warmth but of spirit. Her brow furrowed. "No fire?" He stepped closer, the scent of leather and smoke clinging to him. His shadow fell across her and the child. "Your fire is hidden, buried, but not gone." The words struck her like an arrow, though she couldn't explain why. Something in his voice cut deeper than her husband's cruel dismissal. She stared up at him, breath unsteady, searching his face. I have nowhere to go," she whispered, her defenses cracking. He didn't answer right away. His gaze dropped once more to the baby. The infant had quieted now, staring up at the warrior with wide, blinking eyes. A muscle in his cheek tightened, and for a fleeting second, Martha saw sorrow in him. As though the child had touched a wound long buried at last, he placed a calloused hand over his chest where the bone pendant rested. Where the child breathes, the mother's spirit rises. You will not walk alone. Martha's heart pounded. She searched his eyes, caught between terror and bewildering relief. Why? Why would this man, this feared figure of the plains, choose to stop for her, a stranger? Broken and cast aside? Her voice was little more than a whisper. Why help me? His answer came like a low rumble of thunder. Because once my own blood was cast aside. The words hung heavy in the night air, wrapping around Martha like a blanket of mystery and sorrow. She tightened her grip on her daughter, unable to look away from him. Whoever this man was, he carried his own ghosts. And for reasons she couldn't yet understand, those ghosts had brought him to her. The night wind howled again, scattering dust across the street. And Martha realized that fate had placed a shadow at her side, a shadow that might just become her shield. For a long while, the night held its breath. The warrior's words hung between them, strange, heavy, but carrying a weight Martha couldn't ignore. Where the child breathes, the mother's spirit rises. You will not walk alone. Her heart hammered against her ribs, half with fear, half with something she didn't dare call hope. This man was no neighbor, no preacher, no lawman. He was the figure townsfolk whispered about, a shadow in their campfire tales, the giant of the plains. Martha pulled her baby closer, her voice trembling as she found the courage to ask, Why? Why would you help me? You don't know me. You don't even know my name. The warrior's eyes, dark, deep, unblinking, fixed on her, and for the first time she noticed that behind the hardness there was sorrow. His gaze dropped briefly to the infant, who blinked up at him, her tiny lips pursing before a soft coo escaped. The sound seemed to pierce him in a place hidden beneath the scars, and his jaw tightened. I know enough, he said quietly, though. His voice carried like a low drum roll. I know the pain of being cast aside. I know what it is to be told your blood is not wanted. The words struck her. She wanted to ask more, to pry into the story behind that sorrow, but his tone, sharp, with memory, kept her silent. He stepped closer, and she tensed as his shadow fell across her and the child. You think you have nowhere to go, he continued, his voice steady. But the earth is wide. The fire still burns for those who will keep it. She shook her head, tears welling again. I don't understand. I can't. I can't walk into the wild with a newborn. I have no food, no shelter, nothing but this blanket. If you don't mean me harm, then please just tell me where I can go. Somewhere safe. The warrior studied her face, her trembling lips, her arms wrapped so fiercely around her baby that it seemed she would rather die than let go. His expression softened not much, but enough for her to see that beneath the granite exterior was calmness. A man who had once known gentleness. You ask where to go, he said slowly. Then hear me. The child is not weak. She is fire. Men of this town would snuff it out, call her curse. But among my people, fire is guarded. Fire is sacred. Martha swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight, her breath shallow. What are you saying? The warrior touched his chest with one scarred hand over the bone pendant that glimmered in the moonlight. I am Kael, he said at last, giving her the name the townsfolk never dared speak. If you will trust me, you will not wander alone. You and the child will walk with me. Her lips parted, but words caught in her throat. Kael. She had heard whispers tales of raids and retaliation, of settlers claiming he was half demon, half savage, a man too dangerous to live. And now here he stood, offering not vengeance, but protection. Still, fear gnawed at her. How can I trust you? She stopped herself, ashamed. She didn't want to repeat the cruel words the townsfolk used. He did not flinch. I am what I am, he said, almost with a challenge. But I do not cast mothers into the dust. I do not throw children into the cold. The ones you trusted have done this. Not me. The truth of his words broke something inside her. A sob escaped her lips before she could stop it, and she pressed her face against her baby's tiny head, breathing in the newborn scent of milk and warmth and innocence. Her voice came muffled, trembling. I have nothing left. Kael crouched low, bringing his eyes level with hers. He was close enough now that she could see the faint lines of war paint smudged across his skin, the feathers braided into his hair, the faint sheen of sweat from his long ride. And in his eyes she saw not pity, but recognition, like he knew her grief because he had carried his own. You have more than you think, he murmured. You have her, and that is enough. The baby squirmed then, letting out a soft cry. Kael's gaze flicked to her again, and for an instant, just an instant, Martha saw a flicker of tenderness cross his face. He reached out, slow and deliberate, and rested a calloused finger gently against the infant's tiny fist. The child wrapped her hand around it, gripping with surprising strength. Kael froze as though caught in a memory, his chest rising with a sharp breath. Martha watched, stunned. The feared warrior, the giant of the plains, looked almost undone by the touch of her daughter's hand. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she had yet heard it. Strong, he whispered. She is strong. Martha's tears fell freely now. For the first time since the door had slammed shut behind her, she felt a sliver of something she hadn't dared believe in. Safety. Kael rose again, towering above her, and extended a hand. Come, he said. The road is long, but you will not walk it alone. Martha hesitated, staring at his outstretched hand, her baby warm and breathing in her arms. The world she had known was gone. Before her stood a man of legend, offering a path into the unknown, and though fear still pulsed in her veins, another voice whispered inside her heart, the voice of a mother with nothing left to lose. She shifted her baby in one arm, wiped her tears with the other, and slowly placed her hand in his. The night was deep when Kael lifted Martha onto his horse. She hesitated at first, clutching her baby close as the massive animal stamped its hooves. But Kael's steady hand guided her with surprising gentleness. He swung up behind her, settling easily, the heat of his body radiating against her back. For the first time since being cast into the cold, she felt the faint hum of protection. The horse moved with power, each stride a ripple of muscle and thunder against the earth. Martha held her daughter close, the tiny bundle nestled safely between her and Kael's arm, while the endless plains stretched before them. The moon lit the land in silver, sagebrush bending under the whispering wind. Coyotes howled in the distance, their cries echoing off distant ridges. Martha's mind swirled with fear and disbelief. Hours ago, she had been a wife with a roof, if not with love. Now she was a castaway, riding into the wilderness with a man settlers called a phantom and a giant. She glanced back once, the flickering outline of Dry Creek fading into the distance, its church spire a lonely silhouette. No tears came this time. The grief was too deep for tears. Kael's voice broke the silence, low and steady as the hoofbeats. You fear me. Martha stiffened but didn't deny it. You're not like any man I've known. Good, he said simply, and for a long moment, the only sound was the creak of leather and the rhythmic thud of hooves. She swallowed hard. Where are you taking us? He tilted his head toward the horizon, to the cliffs of Red Canyon. My people camp there, hidden from your town's eyes. You will have food, fire, safety. The words were foreign to her ears' safety, fire. Words that should have come from her husband, but had never truly been hers. Her baby stirred then, giving a soft cry. Martha rocked her gently, whispering words of comfort. To her surprise, Kael slowed the horse, his hand steadying her. "She feels your fear," he murmured. "Children know before words." Martha looked back at him, startled. The moonlight caught his features' high cheekbones, sharp. Lines cut into bronze skin. Scars slashing across his chest like a map of battles survived. His hair streamed in the wind, the beads and feathers clinking softly. He looked like a figure carved out of legend, yet he spoke with a depth she hadn't expected. As dawn broke, the sky blushed with streaks of pink and gold. The land unfolded. Before them rolling plains, rising cliffs that caught the sunlight like burning embers, and far below the red canyon where eagles wheeled on the updrafts. The air smelled of sage and smoke. Martha breathed deep, the scent filling her lungs with something that felt almost like life returning. The camp revealed itself, slowly, thin trails of smoke curling from hidden fires, the distant silhouettes of horses grazing near the canyon rim. Figures emerged from the shadows as they approached. Men, women, children wrapped in blankets, faces painted with colors of earth and sky. They watched with quiet intensity, eyes flicking between Martha, her child, and the towering figure of Kael. Martha's heart pounded. She felt exposed under their gaze, like an intruder stepping into a sacred place. She tightened her hold on her baby and whispered, "They'll hate me. I'm not one of you." Kael dismounted, then reached up, his strong arms lifting her and the child down as if they weighed nothing. "You are a mother," he said firmly. "That is enough." The words struck her harder than she expected. All her life, her worth had been measured by what she could give a man, a dowry, a home, a son. Never had anyone looked at her simply as a mother, as someone whose strength was in the life she carried and protected. One elder stepped forward, hair silvered with age, eyes sharp as eagle talons. He studied Martha for a long, quiet moment, then turned to Kael. "Who is she?" Kael's answer was simple, but his voice carried across the camp like a vow. "A woman cast out. A child called Burden. I found them in the dust. Now they walk with me." A murmur rippled through the gathered people. Some frowned, others nodded with solemn understanding. Martha shifted uneasily, but Kael's hand brushed against her arm, steady, grounding. The elder's gaze softened as it fell on the child. "A child is never curse," he said, his voice weathered but strong. "Only men blinded by pride would." "Say so." Martha's chest tightened. For the first time since giving birth, she felt no shame in holding her daughter. She adjusted the blanket, letting the baby's face show, the tiny lips parted in sleep. Pride fragile, new stirred within her. Kael's deep voice carried again, "This fire will be guarded." The people bowed their heads in agreement, and in that moment, Martha realized her life had shifted. She was no longer the cast-out wife of Dry Creek. She was a mother standing at the edge of a new world, with a warrior giant at her side. And though the road ahead was uncertain, something inside her whispered that the worst had already passed. The fire crackled low, sending tiny sparks into the night air as the wind whispered through the tall pines. Lila sat close to the flames, rocking the baby gently in her arms. Her eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but fear kept her from sleep. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound from the woods pressed against her nerves. Across from her, Kael crouched in silence, his form illuminated by the orange glow. Shirtless beneath the starlit sky, his bronze skin gleamed as if cut from stone, muscles rippling with every subtle movement. The long black hair that framed his sharp face glinted with turquoise beads and eagle feathers. Tribal jewelry clinked softly against his chest when he shifted. the carved bone pendant resting above his heart catching the firelight. He had spoken little since leading her away from town. Only short commands, gruff but protective. Stay close. Keep the child warm. Do not look back. His presence was both terrifying and comforting, like standing near a storm, unsure if it would strike or shield you. "Why are you helping me?" Lila finally asked, her voice trembling against the silence. Kael lifted his gaze, dark eyes piercing her as if they could see through every layer of her being. For a long moment he said nothing, the silence stretching into something heavy. Then, in a low voice roughened by years of command, he answered, "Because no child deserves the weight of another man's shame." Lila swallowed hard, clutching her daughter closer. They called her a curse. They said I was useless for giving birth to a girl." Her voice cracked. "I would rather die than give her up." Kael's jaw tightened, his gaze drifting to the flames. Memories flickered behind his eyes, ghosts of a sister long gone, a mother's cry silenced by cruelty, a people driven to the edges of the world. He understood exile. He understood rejection. "You are stronger than you think," he said finally. "The girl is life, not curse. Those who cast you out, they are the cursed." The words struck Lila like a spark to dry tinder, igniting something inside her. For the first time since being thrown from her home, she felt her chest ease, the crushing despair lifting slightly. She stared at him, seeing not just the warrior before her, but the shadow of a man who carried his own wounds, his own banishment. The baby stirred, letting out a tiny cry that pierced the night. Kael's eyes shifted, scanning the tree line with the precision of a predator. He stood, his towering frame a silhouette of strength against the star-pinned sky. The tribal jewelry glinted faintly as he moved, every inch of him alert. "We are not alone," he murmured. Lila froze, her breath catching. "What do you mean?" Kael lifted a hand, silencing her. He stepped into the darkness beyond the fire, moving like a shadow come to life. The forest seemed to bow around him, the crack of twigs under his bare feet muffled by the weight of his control. Lila clutched her baby, heart racing, staring into the dark where he vanished. Minutes felt like hours. Then, out of the shadows, Kael returned. His eyes were sharper, jaw set, but he carried no weapon in hand. "Riders," he said simply. "3, maybe 4. Hunting. They are not from my people." Lila's stomach twisted. "The townsfolk? Or men who profit from?" "The weak," Kael said, his tone hard. "Either way, they will not take the child." He looked at her then, not just at her face, but at the way she held her daughter with trembling defiance, the way her fear could not crush her will. Something flickered in his gaze, something unspoken but powerful. "You will not be alone." He added quietly, "Not while I stand." The fire hissed as a log split in two, showering sparks into the dark sky. Lila's chest tightened with both fear and something she hadn't felt in days' hope. Here, with this fearsome warrior whose presence alone seemed carved from legend, she realized the world had not abandoned her completely. Fate had delivered her not to despair, but to a protector who walked between shadow and fire, and somewhere. In the night, the sound of distant hooves began to echo. The storm came not with rain, but with hooves. Long before the sound reached the canyon walls, Kael had stilled, his body tense as a drawn bowstring. The woman noticed it first in his eyes, the sudden narrowing, the way his long black hair whipped in the wind as though every strand carried warning. He rose from the fire without a word, the glow painting the scars across his chest like lines of old lightning. "Stay close to the rocks," he told her, his voice low, his native tongue roughened by English. "Do not make a sound." She clutched, the baby tighter, heart hammering. The firelight flickered on her pale face, illuminating the fear she could not hide. Her child stirred but did not cry, as if even the newborn sensed the weight of what approached, and then she heard it, the faint thunder of riders. Hooves pounding across the desert floor, rolling closer, echoing through the canyon like the earth itself was unsettled. She felt her blood run cold. Kael's hand gripped the handle of his tomahawk, a weapon carved of stone and wood but carrying the weight of centuries. His copper armbands gleamed faintly in the firelight as his muscles tightened. Ready. He was shirtless, barefoot, and outnumbered by whoever came. But he carried himself as though he were a fortress of his own. The woman whispered, "They've found us?" Kael turned his head just enough to meet her gaze. His dark eyes burned. "Steady. They will not touch you." The hooves grew louder, nearer until torchlight began to flicker against the canyon rim. Shadows of riders loomed against the night sky, their shapes growing larger as they approached the narrow mouth of the canyon. Dust swirled in their wake, turning the air heavy. The woman pressed herself against the canyon wall, holding her daughter beneath her shawl. She prayed silently, though even she wasn't sure to whom. Kael moved forward into the open, his figure illuminated by both fire and moonlight. His long black hair whipped across his shoulders, eagle feathers trembling in the wind. The bone pendant at his chest caught the light, the jewelry of a warrior, a son of the desert. He looked every inch the legend mothers whispered to their children to keep them safe, the kind of man who walked out of storms and stood against armies dot at the canyon's mouth. The riders slowed. Their torches lit their faces, white men, ranch hands, the same men who had thrown her out of her home only days before. Their eyes shifted, unsettled, when they saw Kael waiting for them like a stone rooted in the earth. One of them sneered, spitting into the dirt. "Well, I'll be damned. The woman's hiding with a redskin giant." Another laughed, but it was nervous, the sound cracking in the canyon's echo. "Step aside." The first man barked at Kael. "The girl goes back to town. She's our business, not yours." Kael's voice was calm, but it carried like iron struck on an anvil. "She is under my protection. You will not take her." The men exchanged glances. There were 5 of them, each armed with rifles, revolvers, and the confidence of men used to having the upper hand. Yet none of them moved forward. Something in Kael's presence, a quiet fury in his stillness, held them back. The woman, peering from the shadows, felt tears sting her eyes. For the first time since her banishment, someone had spoken for her. One rider snarled, raising his rifle. "Last chance, savage." Kael stepped forward, the firelight catching the scars carved into his chest, reminders of every battle he had walked away from. His tomahawk gleamed in his hand. His long black hair whipped like a banner of defiance. "I have no last chance," he said. "Only a first strike." The canyon fell silent, even the wind holding its breath. The riders shifted uneasily, realizing too late that they faced not a man, but a force carved out of stone, fire, and blood. The woman's heart pounded as she clutched her baby. For the first time, fear and hope warred within her. She did not know if Kael could survive what was about to happen, but she knew he would not bend. The night crackled, the fire snapped, and the storm of men and steel edged closer. And Kael, shirtless and unyielding, stood ready to meet it. The canyon air vibrated with the pounding of hooves and the harsh metallic rattle of guns. Kael stood at the edge of the firelight, shirtless, every muscle taut and coiled, bronze skin shining in the glow. His long black hair whipped around his face, feathers and beads clinking softly, a subtle counterpoint to the storm of approaching riders. The carved bone pendant rested heavy against his chest, copper armbands catching sparks from the fire. He did not flinch. The woman pressed her baby tightly to her chest, kneeling behind a rock as Kael's shadow stretched across the canyon floor like a living wall. Fear churned in her stomach, but there was something else now, a fierce, budding trust. He was her protector. her child's guardian. A giant forged of strength, fire, and unyielding resolve. The riders had reached the canyon's mouth. 5 men, rough and leering, rifles ready, eyes wild with the expectation of victory. One stepped forward, pointing a gun at the woman. "Hand her over, giant, or she dies." Kael's gaze didn't waver. His voice was low, but it carried across the canyon like the growl of a wolf. "She will not die. Step closer, and you will see the wrath of the plains." The men hesitated, unease flickering in their eyes. Kael's presence was more than human. Every scar, every sinew, every deliberate motion radiated power. His eyes burned like embers, dark and fierce, fixed upon them with an intensity that rooted them in place. Then he moved. A single step, and the ground seemed to tremble beneath him. Another, and the air thickened, charged with the inevitability of his force. Kael advanced like a shadow in motion, the firelight playing across his chiseled chest, highlighting the tattoos of past battles etched into his skin. His long hair streamed behind him, beads and feathers catching glimmers of light, a living banner of warning. The lead rider fired. The bullet kicked up dust at Kael's feet, and without hesitation, Kael flung himself sideways, rolling across the rock-strewn ground. He was faster than thought possible, every movement fluid, deliberate, like a predator born to the hunt. A rifle snapped again, and Kael closed the distance, tomahawk in hand. His muscles coiled, then unleashed a controlled force that sent the first rider sprawling, horse and man entangled in dust and yells. The others faltered, unsure whether to advance or flee, fear seeping into their bones. The woman gasped but did not move. Her baby stirred, tiny hands brushing against her cheek. Kael's eyes flicked toward them for a fraction of a second, then back to the attackers. There was no hesitation. Every movement was calculated, a deadly dance that kept them at bay without stepping closer to her or the child. One by one, the riders realized the futility of their assault. Kael was more than a man, they could see it now. He moved like the wind, struck like lightning, yet held a strange code, leaving the woman and child untouched. Dust rose around them, the canyon echoing with shouts and the soft metallic ring of Kael's jewelry as he moved. Finally, the last rider's courage broke. He wheeled his horse around and fled, hooves pounding in retreat across the plains. The others followed, the echoes of their flight swallowed by the canyon walls. The fire crackled softly in the silence that followed. Kael exhaled, the tension in his body relaxing only slightly. He sheathed his tomahawk and stepped toward the woman. His bare feet touched the dirt lightly, and he lowered his gaze to meet hers. The fear in her eyes was tempered now by awe, gratitude, and something deeper, a recognition of the bond forged in the night's peril. You saved us," she whispered, voice trembling. Kael's jaw softened almost imperceptibly. He crouched, slightly to be closer to her and the child. "No one harms what I guard," he said. "Not while I draw breath." The baby stirred again, tiny fingers curling around Kael's large hand as if sensing the strength and protection he offered. Lila's eyes filled with tears, and she smiled through them, the first real smile she had allowed herself in days. She realized now that the giant was not just a protector, he was a bridge to a new life. The night sky had begun to lighten as dawn approached. The canyon walls glowed faintly, painting the figures in gold and rose. Kael's muscles flexed in the soft light, his hair falling over his shoulders, beads and feathers catching the sun's first rays. He had stood between death and life, fear and hope, and emerged unyielding. For the woman, for the child. The giant had become legend, and in the quiet after the storm, she understood that life had changed forever. She was no longer a castaway. She was a mother with a warrior by her side, and a child who would grow knowing that strength, courage, and protection could come in human form. Kael looked at her once more, dark eyes softened by an unspoken promise. We walked together now, always. And with that, the wind carried their small firelight into the dawn, the plains stretching endlessly before them wild, free, and waiting for the steps of the mother, the child, and the warrior who would never let them fall.